Welcome, everybody. Glad to see you out here this afternoon. I'm going to be talking to you about securing a remote workforce. This is something that has been my day in, day out job for the last 2 years. My name is Jesse Harris. I'm a cybersecurity analyst. I work at Micro Focus. You may know their building down the road. I'm sure that half of this room has probably worked there at some point. So the question is, who am I? Yes, that is me. That's December 1985 in a Commodore 64. So I've been doing computer stuff for a very long time. Our family picked up our first in-home computer in 1989. It was a Packard Bell 286. Before Packard Bell was really awful. I got a hand-me-down 286 from my grandfather 2 years later, which since then I've been building all my own. My home setup now is hopelessly over-engineered. I'm part of the Utah Home Labs, and you've probably seen them in the exhibit hall with the giant rack of gear. That's what all of our homes look like. My background has been mostly in technical support. I've also worked with some cybersecurity companies, Symantec, supporting PGP. I was also with RSA for 8 years before landing at Micro Focus. I will make absolutely no apologies for the many puns, dad jokes, and memes in this slide deck. That's how I roll. So if you're not good with this, this is not the presentation for you. So these are some of my top threats to physical security in my home. Those of you who have children will understand this. The toddler will just happily wander in and start banging away on the keyboard like she's dad. I have the good sense to lock my workstation, but one time she managed to get me locked out of it by entering an incorrect password one too many times. What would have happened if I had been locked out permanently? How would I have gotten back in? All of the contacts I have are sitting on that computer. I'd have to figure out some other way to log in. So this does raise some interesting questions of what kind of physical security questions start popping up when people are working from home. How are you going to validate that that person is who they say they are when they call in and say, help, my kids locked me out of my workstation? Do you know how to identify them? Quick show of hands, how many of you know your employee ID? I have no idea what it is. I couldn't tell you at all. But that's the first piece of information the help desk asks you for when you call in. And so you have to provide alternate ways of identifying yourself. That can be a real challenge with remote employees if they may try to engineer their way into a system. I have to go log into Workday and figure out what that is. They don't have the ability to walk down the hall, knock on IT's door to get a problem like that solved. So that is one big challenge there, is your kids could, in fact, effectively be a denial of service on you getting your work done. So I want to talk about the difference between physical security in your office and physical security at home. So if you think of your typical office building and how it's physically secured, you have some locking front doors. You probably have a key card-based entry. There's probably someone sitting there at the front desk to vet visitors. You are educating your users on tailgating, locking their workstations. The way that at one job, we educated people on locking their workstations by changing their background to a picture of David Hasselhoff whenever they did not. You always lived in fear of being hoffed. There's probably security cameras all over the place, probably a closed circuit. You've got a fire suppression system. You've got secured areas within the building with restricted access, maybe even like a SCIF if you're doing federal work. You're doing a lot to prevent loss through theft or natural disaster. So how are you going to replicate this physical security at home? You obviously can't replicate all of it. You're not going to ask your employees to have keycard entry into their house. They're not going to have an assistant at their house vetting people at the door. You're not going to have a sprinkler system in somebody's house. But all the threats are still there, aren't they? There's the threat of someone being in there that shouldn't be there. There's the threat of fire or natural disaster that may cause data loss or equipment loss. These are all things that you have to kind of shift your thinking of, well, how are we handling that physical security when someone's in the home? Do we give them tips on making sure they're operating in a safe workspace? Do we have some sort of program to help them secure that physical workspace? I'm fortunate in that I have a dedicated office, but a lot of employees, when they were forced remote from COVID, there was no office. They sat at the kitchen table or at the couch or wherever. Nor should we expect them to just replicate their office environment at home. The whole point of remote work is you work wherever you can get the work done. And so you have to very much change your mindset when it comes to physical security that way, and that's something that we've had to consider too. We think of the workspace now is not just a home, but I've done plenty of working vacations. I mean, while I've been here, I've been out in the lobby, taking meetings, getting work stuff done, in what could be considered an unsecured open environment. You might stroll down to your neighborhood coffee shop and decide this is a great place to work today. You may even decide, you know what, Puerto Vallarta is calling my name. I'm going to go use my laptop on the beach today. That's you have a whole host of other physical security concerns there. I actually had someone who she took her laptop to the beach and, was working there. And, she didn't get it wet or anything, but there was enough salt spray in the air to cause corrosion and kill the laptop. That is a physical security concern because you're looking at the loss of a device and the loss of being able to be productive. So there's another security thing to think of. You're also thinking about, attacks a little differently. You do think about shoulder surfing in an office, but if you're in a public space, man, everybody's a shoulder surfer. I mean, how many screens that are not yours have you seen today? Exactly, all of them. You have to worry about, an evil maid attack where somebody has physical access to the device and may be able to pilfer data. For instance, you're in the coffee shop, you're working away, someone calls up, hey, I've got your chai latte ready. You get up for a second, you've taken your eyes off that system for just long enough for someone to plug in some USB device and load something and walk away. So it takes a lot of education there of making people think in terms of that, especially if they're working in those public spaces. You can think of things such as making sure that laptops are always locked, they're powered off, that you're using privacy filters, or that you have your back to the wall where you're in a public space. So there's a little bit of user training that's involved there that you might not necessarily have to do when everyone's in an office. Because in an office, usually odds are good if someone sees the information, they probably should have access to it. Missing laptops are such a huge problem with a remote workforce. When you have it sitting in the office all the time, you don't really have to worry about it disappearing. More often than not, it's going to be there when you come home. But the more move events you have of, well, I had it at home, but then I took it to school so I could work between classes, and then after that, I went to the co-working space and I worked there, and then I threw it in my car because of going to dinner after that, and so it stayed in my car. That's creating a lot of opportunities for loss via theft, and you have to think about, those kinds of problems there. You also have to think about, the value of all those assets. Like at home, I have the corporate-issued laptop, and I also have a pair of Mac Minis sitting on my desk for testing Mac OS software, making sure that we can support those with security software. I have a few $1,000s of company assets sitting in my house. If I change jobs, obviously I'm going to have to mail it all back. You would be surprised how many people think that laptop is a parting gift. We have far too many instances of where laptops disappear, and I'm not a lawyer, but vet this by your corporate counsel or lawyer or whoever you trust, not Lionel Hutz. You don't really have a lot of recourse except filing a theft report if someone steals a laptop. And for a 3-year-old laptop whose value is depreciated to a few $100s, are you going to go through that? But the data is still sitting on that laptop, isn't it? And the data is what you're concerned with. You're not really concerned about, that laptop that you might e-waste for a few $100s. You're concerned with all the data there. So you have to be especially concerned with what kind of controls you have when you no longer can get that device in your physical possession. And so you're looking at a lot of basics there. You're looking at things like having disk encryption. You're looking at having some sort of remote management platform that can do lockouts or wipe the drive. Your endpoint software will give you a lot of data about a system. Last time it booted up, its last known IP address, the time zone it's in, all sorts of very relevant information that can help you with locating where it is in the case of theft or loss. So these are a lot of things to bear in mind is your asset tracking and making sure that when it comes back to the depot, you know where it's gone. So I ran into this unique problem the first time I went into the office. It was about 1.5 years after I was hired, and because the only time I'd ever been into the office was to pick up my badge. Do you want to guess what I didn't remember to bring with me when I went in there? The badge. I left the badge sitting at my desk on home, and I realized that right as I was pulling into the parking lot. And I am certainly not going to drive 2.5 hours back home to pick up the badge. Fortunately, I had a coworker there who knew who I was, knew who I was coming, and could get me vetted for that badge. So this is an obvious challenge for remote employees where someone in the office may not have any idea who they are because they've never seen them before. And in my case, my direct manager is in Germany. The coworkers on my team are in India. I'm going into an office in Provo. And fortunately for me, I knew someone there, but if I hadn't, they wouldn't have known who I was at all. And so you have to make sure you have a way to vet those situations where a remote or hybrid employee, you have a way to know that they should be in that physical location. It does create some challenges for physical access there. Having those contacts in the office that know who you are is very good. You want to encourage people to get to know their coworkers across multiple teams, because it does create some opportunities for some social engineering. Someone can come up and say, hey, I'm a remote employee. I've never been to the office before. I'm here to see, Bob Jones, because they went and looked through your company directory that's on your website. And I don't think he's in today, but he knows I'm coming. Can you just get me a visitor badge so I can get in here? That would work on an awful lot of people at reception, wouldn't it? And so you need to make sure that you have those kinds of controls in place for those situations. Of course, I'm going to tell you, every LAN is hostile. We all know about zero trust, and that's something that has become even more prevalent with remote. When you're thinking of your corporate LAN, I'm betting a lot of you in here have flat corporate LANs, don't you? Anyone can talk to any box on the corporate LAN? I know you're not proud of it. I'm not proud of it either. And we hear zero trust thrown around a lot as a buzzword, and I'm sure we all want to stab the salespeople in the face that keep using it and using it incorrectly. But it is very important. We have to pretend that every LAN is hostile. If you think about a home network, if somebody's working from home, they've got family members there. Do you think all those family members are using good security practices? Do you think your kids use good security practices? They do not. They say, oh, that's downloading a cool Minecraft add-on? Yeah, I'm gonna download that. I'm gonna run it right now. Instead, it's ransomware that wants to spread across the LAN where your employee's laptop is sitting. And so you've got to make sure that you have adequate controls on all of your east-west traffic across the network, not just what's going in and out anymore. And the problem is now your network is everywhere a corporate device happens to be. That's every home network, every coffee shop, every public library, every school network. It's everywhere. And so there's no such thing as a trusted network anymore. I think as a group, IT and cybersecurity have gotten overly reliant on the idea of topology playing a crucial role in security. And it can, but we have broken down so many of those walls now. And no one's going to have particularly good security on their home network. I mean, my kids want to watch Plex. They want to be able to cast to the Chromecast. I don't want them to come bug me every time it breaks. I don't want to tell them, oh, you're on the wrong VLAN. Let me fix that for you. They don't want to hear me say that. They're just like, Dad, it just doesn't work. Stop with your nerd talk. That's really it, is the home networks are pretty Wild West that way. Now, you think about the kind of stuff that people are attaching to their home network. It's not just a laptop that's running maybe some suspicious applications. Who's plugging in some nice Wise network cameras to their network? Who's plugging in that handy-dandy $20 Walmart smart thermostat to their network? Who's running a router that hasn't seen an update in 5 years? Everybody. Those home networks are a terrifying soup of danger. And you have to make sure that you're treating it like it is. And that's where I'm tying in of how, there are a lot of problems with those IoT devices that could be, an issue within networks. There are a lot of them that have been found that they phone home for no apparent reason. They just keep shuttling data off to, some data warehouse in China. And I can think back to when I was doing on-site computer repair 20 years ago. If I looked at a device and saw what was going wrong with it, I could immediately say, your kids use this, don't they? Because you would see all the toolbars installed. You'd see that stupid Bonzi Buddy monkey swinging across the screen. You would see pop-ups galore because kids don't know any better. Even our kids don't know any better, and we're telling them better. So in this case, what you need to make sure of is every corporate device needs to have a locally installed and properly administered firewall. Now, your users will absolutely hate you for it too. I know because my users hate me for it. I get developers who scream at me all the time saying, why can't I access my Docker containers? This McAfee firewall is getting in my way. I hate you. I don't blame them. I'm getting in the way of their work. But it's also hard to explain to them, well, yes, that's there because your kids are going onto weird Roblox servers and joining Discords where people are telling them click on all these links and get all the Robux, and that's not what's happening. You've got to make sure that all of the services that people are accessing are similarly secured. You want to make sure that everything is using TLS. I hate that it is the year 2022, and I have to say that, because everything should be using TLS. But there's still a number of plain old HTTP services and unencrypted connections that go out there. You have to be able to monitor and audit for that and create the appropriate controls. That's a reality. Another danger to consider is the internet service provider being used. We have seen a lot of cases of where internet service providers like to harvest DNS records and sell that DNS lookup data to the highest bidder. It could be a case of where they are hijacking NX domain requests and it's giving weird results to employees. So this is something to consider: is are you leaking corporate data because of the ISP, a sketchy ISP that has decided we don't want to raise our prices for customers, but we will make a little extra on the side by selling that data. So you've got to consider: are you protecting that kind of information too? You also need to consider that most well-configured wireless networks are using client AP isolation so that it's not party mode on the network where all the devices can see and talk to each other. I remember one time I went into the Salt Lake City airport, and this was quite some time ago, and they didn't have that turned on. And there were a lot of people who had network shares wide open to the world sitting on that network. That was a little scary. You do need to make sure that you are using things that can reduce those kinds of threats. You could use things such as DNS filtering to block a lot of malicious sites. You can make sure that employees are using a VPN connection to make sure you have a trusted exit point. This ties into the next point. Now, VPNs are definitely not the new hotness. They have not been for a long time. VPNs are not really security. VPNs are changing your exit point. That's the way to think of them. A lot of the traditional thinking is, oh, you VP'd into the corporate network, you must be a corporate employee, you should have access to whatever you need to. That's a very bad idea, because again, you have no idea what that endpoint with the VPN is talking to on the other side. Now, what it can be useful for is controlling where traffic exits. So for instance, where I described where an ISP might be harvesting your DNS lookup data and selling it to the highest bidder, a VPN can send all that DNS query data through your network instead, so that that network is not going to steal that information. It's not hijacking that information. It's not redirecting a common site to a malicious endpoint. You don't have any DNS poisoning. For us, we are using some DNS filtering from InfoBlocks that allows us to block a lot of malicious domains too, which is very helpful. So it definitely cuts down on the threat landscape there. One downside to that approach is you have to think about the amount of traffic that you are now going to create on your local exit point. Instead of just, the corporate network comes in and hits your internal resources, now everybody's internet traffic is going through there. We are currently using a split tunnel VPN of where corporate traffic comes through the VPN and all the internet traffic goes to the user's home connection. It's kind of a best of both worlds, but again, you're trading a little bit of protection there in order to save on your outbound data costs. So there's a lot of trade-offs involved there, but that's kind of the point of security, is you look at the trade-offs, you evaluate which one is going to be the least bad option. So you want to make sure that you're using a lot of filtering. DNS and URL filtering are very powerful security tools. That's just Baby Yoda. So, DNS filtering has become very popular, and it's popular for a reason. It is extremely lightweight, it's not terribly expensive, and it's extremely effective at taking care of problems with malicious sites. Most of the platforms will allow you to choose what types of content you're going to block, so you can stick to just the dangerous stuff. If you need to block policy violating, things such as violence or pornography, you have those options available to you. We have found that it is exceptionally powerful for being non-intrusive to the user. It really doesn't have much of a performance impact to them. Most of the complaints we get are sites that have been improperly classified. An example, we decided, well, we're going to go ahead and block park domains because everybody knows park domains are kind of suspicious. Someone's got a domain, they aren't posting anything on it. There are a surprising number of businesses who register a domain and only do email on it. And we don't have the ability in InfoBlock to set a separate policy in our email servers. So when we're sending an email to one of these vendors that put their domain on a park domain, what do you think happens when we go searching for an MX record? We get nothing, and the outbound email fails, and everyone gets very angry. So you do have to be careful with your DNS filtering, but it can be extremely powerful at the same time. We have found that it has exposed some botnet infections that were floating out there. We have been able to stop some ransomware beaconing. We have cut down drastically on the amount of scammy ads that come up. I can't tell how many times users open tickets to say, oh, Chrome is telling me that I need to update McAfee. Well, no, that's wrong. Don't do that. This particular platform does have an endpoint agent. I know you really wanted a 14th endpoint agent in all of your workstations. There are endpoint products that have some URL filtering that you can layer on top if DNS is not enough, if you need to filter out just carving out portions of websites. That one does tend to be a little bit heavy, and it's a little harder to manage. It's a lot of work. I've found that DNS filtering strikes a very good balance there. But that gives users who are remote a lot of protection when they're not on the corporate network anymore. Firewalls, of course, are an essential piece of equipment. You are still going to need to have them. Software firewalls certainly have come a long way. I imagine there are enough people old enough here to remember Zone Alarm from way, way back in the day, before Windows XP actually had a workable firewall built in there. Those early ones are really terrible. They cause all sorts of performance problems. You've got pop-ups galore. These days, you can get a lot of very powerful results out of the built-in Windows firewall, and it even has a lot of centralized management through Microsoft's Intune platform. A lot of third parties can also administer that for you if you already have a platform that does that. And you absolutely should be managing it. You want to make sure you have those kinds of proactive controls in there. You want to make sure that you're saying, hey, by default, block inbound SMB connections. Nobody needs to connect to an SMB share on a user device for any reason anymore. You want to make sure that the endpoint firewall is configured so that if it is on a malicious network, all that traffic's just bouncing right off of it. As I mentioned, our software developers are constantly trying to open ports left, right, and center, and they will be angry about that. But, it's a protection we need to have. For those users, we are able to give them some of the ability to manage some of their own firewall settings. And so we've created this carve-off. And you're thinking, oh, well, they're creating exposure. It is, but you have to, again, you're considering the trade-off here of, do we need people to be able to do their jobs as securely as they can? And if you're getting in the way of them doing their jobs, it doesn't matter how secure it is. You're not suiting the business need anymore. That's not what information security is all about. And you want to make sure that you have good centralized management of all of this. You want to be able to tell at a glance, do people have the policies that we need them to have? For the people who we've entrusted to manage the policies, are we auditing them and making sure they're doing sane things with that control that we've given them? Do we make sure that they have the right control? These are all important questions to be asking, especially because you don't have an IT person just down the hall from many of these people anymore. So when I got my corporate laptop, one of the first things I did was I hooked it up to my network printer at home, because there's nothing worse than copying a document to a thumb drive, plugging it into my home system, and printing from there. It's very inconvenient. One thing I did learn very quickly is that the Brother utility that comes with it likes to be very, very chatty when searching for DNS entries. It is constantly looking for the name of the printer, dot whatever DNS suffixes are in my network connection list. And my corporate laptop has about 20 of them. So you can imagine that when I go and look at my DNS query logs, it is an absolute mountain of queries just looking for my printer. It's about 5% of my total DNS queries on my network, no lie. But this is an interesting question, is do you know what systems your user workstations are talking to? You probably don't have that visibility. It would be nice to have that visibility, because again, you just plop that down in a hostile environment. Who's trying to talk to it? Who is it trying to talk to? If you are going through that centralized DNS, then you've at least got an idea of who it may be talking to, but you also want to make sure that you're looking at that kind of stuff. I am, a good example here is I'm using Run Zero at home, their free tier, to do scans on my home network. And I am certain that those scans hitting my corporate laptop probably look really suspicious, because it's poking and prodding and doing everything it can to fingerprint that device and tell me what's running on it. How do you identify something that's not malicious like that versus an actively malicious attack like that's coming from another system on that network? It'd be pretty hard to tell. If you don't know, Run Zero was created by the creator of Metasploit. So it's using the exact same techniques. That can look pretty scary to someone who doesn't know what's happening there. You're going to see other Windows systems on the network are going to be chatting with it over SMB to say, hey, what network shares you got? What are you hosting there? Let me talk to it. Remember, that home network is a flat network space, a dangerous network space, and everyone wants to talk to everyone. They're very social. And then you've got all of the garbage devices on there doing it too. So it become very noisy. You've got a lot of background radiation you have to try and filter through. A lot more than if that laptop is sitting in your office, where you don't have the same level of background radiation, or you at least know what it is when you see it. You want to try and avoid the alert fatigue that comes with that. You don't want to run around hair on fire just because somebody's got a very bad webcam there that won't shut up. You also need to look for those potential insider threats. I'm thinking if I'm an attacker and I wanted to really weasel my way into a network, I wouldn't go trying to beat down the castle walls. I would be trying to find the remote employee and hijack their system and piggyback on their access, get into the VPN that way. And it really highlights that protecting the endpoints has become far more important than it has ever been. But everybody hates Endpoint. These are your users when you install Endpoint on their system. I have never heard so much weeping, wailing, and gnashing in teeth as I have about Endpoint. And 90% of the time, when someone says it's Endpoint, it's not Endpoint. They would much rather listen to Yoko Ono doing Nickelback covers than deal with EDR. When a user opens a ticket and says then I see that they're missing Endpoint, they ghost me the second I ask, how come you don't have that installed? And the reality is it's really hard to fix that problem. You can't go down to their desk and say, move, and do it for them. So this raises questions about how are you distributing and maintaining that endpoint software. That's going to be a big challenge. We are an SCCM shop, and SCCM works pretty well, but you need to get on VPN to get those updates. And believe it or not, there are a lot of people who just don't. What do you do when a workstation's endpoint stops talking? How do you get in and fix it? You don't have a way to force the issue. You can try some remote management tools to try and get in there. How are you going to handle these situations? We actually have a lot of endpoints where they break. And it's not because the user did anything. It's just because software's trash. Software just breaks, and you never know why sometimes. And you uninstall, reinstall, and everything's happy as can be. You have to be able to identify that. So you do need to make sure that you can establish a beachhead on these systems. We do take a few approaches to make sure that we have those endpoint beachheads. The most important of that is making sure that it's always rolled into your standard corporate images. Unfortunately, we have a lot of users who seem to think it's a good idea to wipe the corporate image and put their own copy of Windows on there, and they don't end up having that stuff. Plenty of people think that's a great idea. But having it there as an assumed default sharply reduces any installation failures that come from other methods. The next line of defense is making sure that we get it installed via SCCM if it's missing, or distributing updates that way. We unfortunately have to have them connect to the VPN for a number of consecutive hours in order for that to work, but management platforms are getting better. Microsoft Intune is one of those cloud-native ones that handles it for you. Platforms now oftentimes can say to the endpoints, "Hey, update, from our cloud repository instead." And that really makes a lot of makes a lot of difference. I'll tell you right now, there are a lot of endpoint solutions that are still pushing on-prem management servers. Please avoid them. They're so much more trouble than they're worth. You have to try and establish DMZs, and you have traffic flowing in and out of the firewall, and it's far more trouble than you want to deal with. And even though we have all of these automated systems and management systems for distributing it, we're still having to put installers on a SharePoint site for people to go download them from. You got to have those fallbacks. You got to have the layers there of how do we get this out there. If you're covering 95% or more of your systems, you're actually doing pretty good. So if you think, oh man, 96%, I am trash. No, that's your top tier. Give yourself a pat on the back. So congratulations, all of your endpoint agents are installed. Are they working? Do you have any idea that they're working? So as a minimum baseline, you need to check to see if they are checking in and talking back to you or not. There are an amazing number of times where a user workstation is fine, but the endpoint software, for whatever reason, just said, I'm just not going to phone home to the mothership anymore. This problem, of course, gets harder at scale. What we've established as kind of a good cutoff is that we look at endpoints that have been silent for a month, and then we have to do all sorts of reporting and cross-checking to make sure that the systems have actually no longer there. And this is going to get hard. Anyone who has a CMDB, a system inventory that you're proud of, raise your hand. Good, there's no liars in this room. I don't either. I have a cobbled together mess that gives us kind of an idea of if endpoints are still out there or not. And it's a mess of Python and API calls and a SQL database and a reporting platform to try and figure out what's going on there. Our default is that after a month, we say, if we haven't seen it for a month and the system has been removed from SCCM, we're pretty sure it's gone now and we can prune those and get the licenses back. License management is going to be a real problem with your deprovisioning. You want to make sure your deprovisioning processes are good. Users will definitely let you know when a policy gets in the way of their work, so that can give you an idea of whether or not it's working properly. I'll give you some examples of user tickets that people have actually opened with us, and I swear I'm not making any of these up. One user opened a ticket with us because they said, "Hey, I'm trying to install Blue Iris on my laptop and it's not working." For those of you that don't know, Blue Iris is a camera server for storing all of your network camera footage. Why would you need that on a user laptop? Apparently, they had the great idea of, well, I have my workstation here, and I'm not really using it all that much. I'll just have all my home cameras record to it. What? We've had people who have been attempting to install the latest Forza game on their system. Why you would attempt to run that on an integrated GPU is beyond me, but apparently someone was really hard up in their need for a racing game. I think everyone has had to deal with the scourge of TeamViewer, right? So many users are trying to install those remote management tools on there that have horrible security problems, are unauthorized, and we are constantly looking for what are these things that should not be running, and to continually work on those policies. We've had to create new policies based on user needs that come up. You have to make sure that you have this continuous feedback loop, because sometimes when things aren't working, people will just grumble about it, and you don't really hear about it. In an office setting, eventually that grumbling comes back to you. But if everyone's remote, maybe you don't hear about that grumbling. And so you have to take a much more proactive approach to being able to manage that. So you will have endpoint agents that just stop checking in. And sometimes you're going to find out that the employee is no longer with the company and their laptop has been sent back. Other times you'll see the employee is with the company and it just stopped working. And this is where things get really tricky, is because usually, unless the endpoint's causing a problem for the user, they're not going to tell you that there's a problem, because they don't know that there's a problem. And you have to be able to figure out, when they stop working and have a process in place for being able to fix them. Right now with us, that's reaching out to our managed service provider and opening tickets with them and saying, hey, please go fix this endpoint. Remember, users, they hate endpoint like Russian tanks hate Ukrainian tractors. They will fake their death and start working under an assumed identity if that's what it takes to avoid it. And it's not like you can walk over to their desk and tell them that you have to do it. And our decommissioning process is also a challenge, because we don't get a notification from HR when somebody gets offboarded. Do any of you get a notification from HR when your people leave? Good, you have good processes. I see most of you have your hands down, and so you know this pain. And so when a system just stops checking in on everything, you don't know what's happening. Is the employee out on FMLA leave? Are they taking a very long vacation? Did they take a very long vacation to Switzerland with a pile of company money? You have no idea. And so I talked earlier about what I've done to try and address this, and I've effectively built a shadow CMDB that tracks this. It's using API calls from our endpoint products, some emailed reports that come from other divisions of the company, a bunch of Python scripts. Learn Python. You need to know Python. A Postgres database, and we're using a reporting platform called Redash. And so we were ingesting all of our data from Carbon Black, McAfee, Qualys, SCCM, and AD, and as well as some reporting from our ticketing system. And from this, I could create a list of, here are endpoints I think are gone. It's not an SCCM anymore. AD thinks it's inactive, hasn't checked in any endpoint agent for 30 days, which helps us go in and clean it up. Because again, you don't want to pay for licenses you're not using. That's money that you would probably rather spend on something else. And when you're in these risk environments, you're going to be dealing with alert overload if you don't tune these things correctly. Because again, you're in hostile environments. You want to make sure that you have really good filtering in place of all of these alerts, because otherwise you can go absolutely nuts. For instance, you could see a system that is making a bunch of DNS queries to a suspicious domain, and you're like, oh man, that must be really bad. And then you find out, oh, this is the employee's personal domain, and they're just running Nextcloud on it to try and sync stuff instead of using the company-approved OneDrive. But you need to be able to handle those alerts, because you're going to generate a lot more alerts in these hostile environments that you're going to generate in your office. You don't want to create alert fatigue. Everyone in this room, I'm sure, has alert fatigue. You're already getting too many emails. You're already getting too many Slack messages. You're already getting, too many PagerDuty messages. And so you want to make sure that you have good filtering to, wrong way. You want to make sure you have good filtering that can pare down those alerts, make sure that you're not getting too many of them. If you can, you want to have some automatic remediation of these alerts when you can. And one of the best things that you can do is work with your tool vendors. Some of you probably already know, but a lot of you may not. Your tool vendors actually will do a lot for you. Carbon Black, once a year, will do a health check report for us. They go through the environment and they come up with recommendations and say, hey, here's how you could be using the product better. That's free. It's already included. Why would you not have someone who knows the product inside and out tell you how you could use it better? You absolutely should make use of those kinds of resources. And I know what you're thinking of, I already have too much to do. I don't have time to act on that. Well, that's one of the big problems that is seen in EDR, is that there's so many alerts that they don't get triaged for weeks or months. But some of the automation is really going to help with that. You also should make use of training resources for the tools that you have available to you. You'd be amazed how many people never read the documentation for these things. Nobody goes and reads the knowledge base articles. Nobody goes and reads the 300-page PDFs that say, here's how things operate. But those are a wealth of information. And I know it's more than you have time to do. But when you do that, you're going to actually reduce your workload. And because you are increasing your alerts, you need to make sure that you have invested heavily in that kind of automation and that kind of filtering. Otherwise, you are going to continue to drown. My goal is to be in charge of automating processes. I don't want to be sitting there remediating every alert. I want the computer to do the work for me. That's what it's there for. It is there for those boring, repetitive, manual tasks that you hate to do. So you should make the computer do those. If you're not sure how to get started with doing any sort of automation, there are a lot of great resources out there. I would strongly recommend learning one or more scripting languages. It could be Python, my favorite. It could be PowerShell. PowerShell is really great. Don't let it put you off because it's a Microsoft product. Bash is even perfectly adequate for a lot of cases. We'll make fun of it because it's so tinker toy, but it's not stupid if it works. It also helps to know a little bit of SQL. There are a lot of really cool things that you can do in Excel, but let me tell you, I have shown people what I've done with some SQL queries that are Excel wizards, and their jaws dropped. So like, wow, that is so much easier. It really is. These are some things that I would strongly recommend. A great way to get started with learning API calls for automation is using Postman. Postman is free. You can fill out fields to give it like the URL that you're talking to, the various values you need to pass, like your authorization token, and it will even give you the code in whatever language you want of how to do it. So you punch in everything, and you say, you know what, Postman, I've told you how to do this API call. Show me how to do it in Python. It gives you the Python script. You have a starting point. You can see how it works. This is a good way to get things started. So we've talked about the challenges of securing the employee workspace, network, and device. And now we have a bigger problem, which is that after all that nonsense, they still somehow have to get into corporate resources to do their job. The most secure computer is one that is turned off, encased in cement, and dropped in the bottom of the Marianas Trench. It's also not very useful, not unless you're in the boat anchor business. So if you're a newer company, some of the best advice I can give to you is building cloud first, because you don't have to consider access to on-prem resources. For all of the rest of us, which I'm pretty sure is most of us, we have to figure out how are we going to get people that virtual access that we need. So VPN is still very popular for this. That's quickly becoming disfavored for a number of reasons. A lot of VPNs are incurring about a 40 to 50% performance hit right off the top. If you're using like OpenVPN, unless you're fancy and have something that's WireGuard based, which I'm guessing is not a lot of people, you're gonna look at those kinds of performance problems. They're also building about the aging models of, well, once you've gotten past the door, you're okay. And really, you need to have, a lot of continuous authentication to make sure that things stay okay. We are starting, you have to also configure a lot of firewalls to allow traffic to moving between network segments from wherever your VPN endpoint is on your network. That gets complex very fast. We're actually implementing FireMon to have a single place to view and edit our firewall configurations, which is great for our network engineers because it's convenient, but it also creates that crown jewel an attacker might want to come after. So again, if we reduce our on-prem resources, then we reduce the value of that. It's one of the reasons I recommend going hosted, and we call it cloud, first. And authentication continues to be a pretty thorny problem. When you used to be able to see remote authentication attempts, that was something that set off a flag by itself. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if someone was trying to come in remotely, you'd look at it a lot more closely because there was a lot less of that traffic. But now, it's most of the traffic. It's all the traffic. And you also have to consider things like where the authentication is coming from. If your US-based employee suddenly logs in from Singapore 3 hours after they logged off, you probably should notice and do something about that. But on the flip side, if they logged in from home yesterday and from a Florida beach tomorrow, that seems plausible, doesn't it? They're remote. They can work from the beach. Their laptop might not work after that. Legacy authentication platforms do make this really hard because a lot of them are very simple, user, password, and maybe you have some sort of multi-factor going on there. But a lot of modern authentication platforms are really helping to sort out a lot of these challenges that occur of you can't use the location reliably as an indicator of whether or not it's legit. So there's a lot of them like Ping, Okta, Azure AD. You're giving up a little bit of control of your authentication, but they have a lot of really great tools there that can really help you out with that. And I hate to pitch tools because a lot of security is process, but you need tools to automate some of these things that would take humans forever to do. It would take an implausible number of people to look at every authentication attempt and say, okay, no. There's not enough people in the world. And many orgs, a lot of you are probably tying back to Active Directory still. I think pretty much everyone is. I work for Micro Focus. We own Novell and we use AD. What does that tell you? But your AD infrastructure is pretty likely to be a museum as much as it is a current record, isn't it? Do you ever clean up your AD? Do you still have workstations in there that are 25 years old as the company? Probably. Is everybody scared to delete things when they aren't sure if they're being used anymore? Do you still have a system in your corner running Solaris 8 and nobody wants to unplug it because you're certain that if you do, it'll break something critical? Yeah, you are. And that is a problem there because you have all of this junk in there and it's your source of truth, but it's full of lies. So you need to make sure that you're cleaning up your group memberships, that you're deactivating your user and service accounts. Yes, you need to make sure your service accounts are taken care of in a timely manner. You need to have a plan to remove these things that are no longer used because these authentication credentials are not just people hopping around on the network. These are people knocking on the front door saying, little pig, let me in. Keep that big bad wolf at bay. And certainly, an identity governance platform is something that can be very helpful. I supported one of them at RSA. Micro Focus sells one. I'm not here to vendor pitch you. And it's hard to get budget for tools, but let me tell you, when they work, they can do the work of 10 system administrators. What I've seen, and this is an incredible thing to watch, a user gets onboarded in the HR platform, the governance platform sees it, and they automatically provision all the accounts that employee needs. In one fell swoop, gives them all of the group memberships they need based on their job title and their manager and their location and everything. Completely automated. They change job positions, that information comes in. Again, all of it is done automated. The user is terminated, all of their stuff is shut down, automated. Nobody's hunting through systems trying to find all those leftover accounts. I know it's hard to justify budget for those kinds of systems because we all operate under budgets. We all are trying to not spend money. But when you look at the kind of return on investment you get on those kinds of platforms, especially with the kinds of mushrooming access you have, it's very much worth it. So you need to make sure that you're controlling that. Another challenge we've run into is the shared password problem. Yes, you should not share your passwords. Realistically, some vendor hands you a Linux appliance and it has a root password on it and you have multiple people who need to access it, right? You're going to have shared credentials. That's the way it is. And so you want to make sure that you have some sort of password manager available for employees that can handle those kinds of situations. You want to be able to store their passwords. They need to be able to share those passwords and those shared secrets. Things like API tokens. Maybe you need to share license keys. You want to make sure that, we're using LastPass. I don't particularly care for it. I like Bitwarden for my own uses. But something like that is something you really need to have around because passwords are not going away anytime soon. I've also mentioned zero trust models as applied to networks, where you assume all networks are hostile, but that's kind of scratching the surface. You need to make sure that you are continually making sure that someone is doing what they're supposed to be doing. If you have a developer that starts poking around your financial systems, would you think that's weird, especially if they don't do anything regarding your financial systems? So maybe you want to do a step-up authentication on them and make sure, hey, are you actually who you say you are? because you don't know who it is. You don't know if it's an attacker that's exploiting access. You don't know if it's an insider threat. You don't know if it's a bored employee just like, hey, what's that system do? I would recommend getting familiar with those zero trust principles. NIST publication 800-207 has the gist of it. It's really great. There's 3 main thrusts to it. You have to have continuous authentication. Always double check, make sure who someone is. Don't have that initial username and password be the end all be all. Second, you need to make sure you're containing the blast radius. You want to make sure that everything's treated hostile. And third, you need to make sure that you have something to centralize your collection of logs and events. Like a SIEM, everyone hates them. They're horrible to configure. They can be a real time suck. But you also can't have everyone sending all their Windows event logs from all these remote endpoints. I mean, what if you got a user that's sitting on CenturyLink DSL? Do you think they want to have half their bandwidth or more consumed by sending their Windows event logs in real time to you? No, you've got to consider that you've got bandwidth constraints now with all of these remote users. Not just the bandwidth that goes out of your office when they're on VPN, but the bandwidth that they've got coming back to you. You can't collect the same amount of information. So you need to make sure that however you're collecting that information, you're doing it in a way that will actually work with what the user has. Yes, there are clouds in your forecast. I know everyone's sick of hearing about it, but I will tell you right now, in a remote workforce, hosted platforms are your savior. We do not buy on-prem anymore. We refuse to buy on-prem. We are kicking as much as we can off to cloud providers. We are doing that because it is far easier to provision remote access and manage a distributed workforce that way. When we first had employees going remote, our McAfee management server was on site, and we had to set up port forwarding so that all of those agents could talk to us, and it was a lot of traffic. And instead, we moved to a cloud platform, and it has been way easier to manage, and it is a lot less headache. And you absolutely want to make sure that you're doing that first, more than anything else. I want to thank you for putting up with me for an hour. I know I've made some bad jokes here, but hopefully you've got something out of this presentation, and I will happily accept any questions, comments, or rude noises.